Hey, it's Brock here with Rock Hill Farms, and today I want to talk about what I think is the biggest mistake that new sawmill owners make when they first start sawing logs up for lumber. And it's a lesson that I've learned over a couple years of milling my own lumber and actually drying lumber that I had milled by other DIY sawyers. And it's about the way you cut the log up primarily. So I'm going to do a little bit of drawing on this log. Right here we have bark. And in from that we have sapwood. Sapwood does not make good lumber. A lot of times when I start off, I would try to draw a box inside of the log like this and cut that box down as a square cant. And then inside of that, I would just start slicing it off. Slice, slice, at however much thickness I wanted out of my finished lumber. But there's a few problems with that, and basically you're not going to get very good lumber if you just follow this method that I'm showing right here. So the biggest problem I find when you get a mill and you start cutting up logs is that you've got a bunch of boards now, but they're not necessarily usable. And depending on what you're doing, you're probably going to want to dry that lumber before you use it. And the first thing you'll find out is that when you cut a stack of lumber and you stack it up and you let it dry, it's going to warp. And it took me a while of talking to other sawyers and watching videos to understand why that board is warping. And there are a few different answers. One is if the wood is drying faster on the top than it is the bottom, that can cause it to bow. So an example would be the boards on the top of your stack are getting hit by sunlight and the underside of that same board is not. So if you can cover the wood, that's preferable. But another factor that a lot of people may not realize is grain orientation. If you think about the way a tree grows, it grows in circles like this. And in the center, you have what's called the pith. This is the young wood. This is the juvenile wood. So everything in the center is when the tree was tiny. And it's uncontrollable and it's going to split and crack and warp and not be any good. So most of us are aware that the worst piece of wood in the log is right here in the center. So we want to avoid using it. But when you look at the rest of the tree, it also grew in circles like this. So you've got grain running out in a circle all the way around. So if I make a 2x12 right here, then this side of that 2x12 has grain going like this. And this side of that same board has grain going like this. When the wood dries, if you had a board and you look at the end of it and all of the grain is going this way, it's going to shrink this way and bring the grain closer together more than it shrinks down the length of the grain. So this piece of wood right here would be a 2x6. And on this 2x6, all of the grain is essentially running the same way. And as you get over to the corner of this one, it's going to start to be more horizontal. If you make another 2x6 here, the grain on that is horizontal. And then if you make another board here, another 2x6, then the grain on this one is curved the other way. This board is pretty good. This board's pretty good. This center board that has the horizontal curved grain is going to warp more than the other two. But this board and this board would be pretty good. But if you cut this entire thing into one board, this is going to dry different than this, which is going to dry different than this. The best possible way to process a log down is called quarter sawing, where you continuously turn this so that you're always getting pieces that have the grain coming across it at least a 45. So these boards right here, this would be a quarter sawn board right here, because the grain is coming across it like this. I don't know how much sense this is making as I draw on the log. So let's cut this thing up and see if we can make it a little more clear. The first part of the process is making a cant, and that will be the way I always do it. I'm going to take my measurement, make sure my pith is centered. If the pith is off, I got a jack, I can raise up that end. We'll get the pith centered up, and then we'll cut it down to a square. All right, so let's talk about this board. It's a 1-inch thick live edge. It might be 15 or 16 inches down here and maybe 10 inches down there. The first part is bark and sapwood. This is no good. And the middle part has grain going this way. The outside part has grain going that way. This part has grain going this way. The odds of this drying flat are very low. And I have saved a bunch of wood like this and had it bow and cup and require a ton of processing to make this usable. And you can do it, but this is not the ideal way to cut this. Now, if you wanted a piece of wood from here to here, you wanted a 1x4 out of this, this would be good quarter sawn 1x4. About 18 inches long. So this is sapwood, this is going to bow, this is quarter sawn, but about here you run out of it because it gets thin. And I've talked about it before that to me firewood, which I sell, is worth almost as much as lumber, depending on what kind of lumber it is. How useful is it? So if you look at this, there's a color change right here. This more reddish color, that's usable wood. This lighter white stuff, that's heartwood. It's not good for lumber. So even though the corners are almost to square, we need to cut it down more. I'm just going to nip the very edge of this off so that we can see the grain pattern better. So this kind of illustrates why it's difficult to get good lumber out of a log like this. Now, my friend the Okie Woodsman does pine, and he said that he doesn't have a problem with the pith twisting and cracking. But on hardwood, you are going to have that problem. So here's the pith. You can see this ring right here. This is juvenile wood, and this is no good. If you look here, and you imagine your rings going around it. So now let's say we don't want to use this inner ring at all. That's the pith. So we're going to draw a line here. Say we're going to cut this out of the log completely. And we've got this piece above and the piece below. So on this piece above, we have quarter sawn lumber about this far. That's quarter sawn. And This is quarter sawn. Because you can see if you look at this piece of wood right here, our grain comes across it like that. And I don't know if that's true quarter sawn, but this should be a stable piece of wood right here. So we're going to cut off this top piece, then we're going to make a cut across here, and we're going to treat each of these pieces differently. Now in the past, I would have said, all right, now we have a 2x12. But it's really not, because this will be a bowed 2x12 or 2x10, however wide this is. And it depends on what you're doing with it. If you want to build something and you want this for a structural support, you can probably just use it. I'm going to have comments, I'm sure, from people who say, I've been doing it that way a long time, it doesn't hurt anything. Well, maybe it doesn't. But in an ideal world, you would not have grain going this way and this way and this way on the same board. So this center section right here, I'm going to make into 4x4s, and I'm going to use them for things that aren't critical, like bunks to stack lumber on. You could make pallets out of this, things like that. So now let's look and see what we have left. This grain is curving this way. This right here would be quarter sawn. This would be quarter sawn, and this would be quarter sawn. Then we would flip it this way, and these boards would be quarter sawn. So we're going to get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 boards. But we're not going to get them by just slicing it this way and then cutting that in half. If you just cut this every 2 inches, you're going to have that lumber that's more likely to bow. We want, like this cutoff right here, has the grain coming across it like this. And some of that is almost 90 degrees, some of it's closer to 45 degrees. But this will create a stable board, whereas just slicing across here won't. As I said before, this is slower and it's more time consuming, but it's going to give you a better product in the finished board. That is a true 2-inch by 4.5 quarter sawn. The grain all goes this way. In the past, I would have just continued slicing the way I was and sliced these last 2. But slicing this across here doesn't give us that grain orientation that we want. If I flip this 90 degrees, it'll be a more stable board. We originally cut this into 3 pieces. The first piece we've quarter sawn into 2x4s. This piece, we've already said, all of this is junk. We can make a 4x4 cut here, and this will be a 4x4. But on the remaining piece, if we cut that in half, our grain goes this way. This right here can be a 2x6, and this right here can be a 2x6 that are quarter sawn. So we have 2 4x4s that aren't good quality lumber. Then we've got a couple of 2x6s here that are quarter sawn lumber. With this, if we make the same cut there, then this 4-inch piece, it goes across like this. That's not bad. This next 4-inch piece has the pith in it. This is junk. This piece down here, we've got grain that goes like this. That's not bad. So we're going to get 1, 2, 3 more good boards out of it. Then these will be more scrap or utility use wood. At some point while I was recording this, my memory card on the camera got full and I didn't catch the end of it. But what we've got here is exactly what I said I was going to do. These are 2x6s that came out of those 2 remaining pieces. What we have over here on the ground are 4x4s that have the pith in them. They're not quarter sawn, they're going to be junk. This is the stack of 2x4s that I milled earlier out of the first chunk. Under that is slab wood. So we don't just get uniform wood. Every tree is unique, it has its own characteristics, and it's a living, growing thing. Then once we turn it into a log and start to process it, we might think of it like, I can just slice this into any size pieces I want, and it's all good wood. Well, that's not really how it works. So that wood over there is usable for something, but it's not good lumber. This is good lumber. This is good lumber because the grain is oriented. What's under that is slab wood, and the slab wood is not junk. It's just going to be used and sold in a different way. So it all serves its purpose, and we have to use it to that purpose or we're going to have issues. Anyway, I appreciate you taking time to watch the video. I'll put links on the screen to a couple more of our videos, and I'll see you next time.